When time sleeps behind the walls and voices melt into blind stone, there remains a city that does not speak, it whispers. A city that hid behind a red gate that opened neither to the wind nor to the passerby, but only to those destined to witness silence bloom in the heart of old Beijing. Here, footsteps arrive only as murmurs. Here, the sky revolves around a throne no one may touch. The forbidden city stands, ever watchful, never sleeping. It is not ruins, but a memory that sighs in the shadow, a tale told only when all else is still. Let us dim the world's noise and step slowly into the place where empires were built in silence and fell without making a sound. In the very heart of ancient Beijing, a massive gate stands tall. It is a deep, dark red, like a dividing line between two worlds. Behind it begins the Forbidden City, a name not given in vain, but because entry was strictly forbidden to the common people, permitted only to those chosen by the emperor himself. Emperor Yongle built it in the early 15th century to be the seat of the throne of heaven on earth. It was not just a city of residence, but a symbol of power and grandeur, where the emperor, the son of heaven, lived in an isolated world, untouched by eyes or sounds. All who were not born inside those walls were barred from it. This is why the city became forbidden to visitors, to wishes, and even to the stories that could not find their way out, but however thick the silence, the walls remain witnesses to everything. Let us move closer to understand what these walls have absorbed that cannot be spoken. Since the city's completion in 1420 AD, its walls have stood like a piece of the sky, neither advancing nor retreating. They stretch for over $9 kilometers, built of brick and stone, covered in a red glaze that shimmers in the light and fades in the rain, but never falls. From the outside, it looked like a closed dream. People would walk by, lift their heads to see the gilded roofs, and whisper, "What happens in there? Who lives behind this wall?" But the wall never answered. It didn't just record, it swallowed time itself. Once, a poet approached one of the walls and stood there for a long time. Then he said, "This wall knows more about us than we know about ourselves." And perhaps he was right. The walls saw kings being born and emperors being buried without funerals. It saw men enter without farewells and never leave. It saw eyes full of fear and trembling steps. It saw orders issued from behind the curtains that changed the destiny of a nation. These walls were not built to protect the city from external invasion. They were not a defense against an army. They were barriers to prevent intrusion, creating a self-sufficient world, closed off from what was within it. It cared nothing for the outside, and it revealed nothing of the inside. An entire city living inside a wall, breathing through small vents that no one was permitted to cross. On winter nights, when the wind swept over the palace roofs, the walls would emit faint sounds. Some say it was just the creaking of wood, but others claimed it was the city sighing. Centuries passed, thrones changed, and faces differed, but the walls remained. They were not torn down, they did not crumble, and they never spoke. But inside these walls, right at the center, lived one man who saw from afar but could not be touched. A man treated not as human, but as the shadow of heaven on earth. Let us enter his palace and see how he lived in a presence where only silence could be heard. In the heart of the Forbidden City, where corridors intersect and shadows are formed by the light itself, lived a man who was not addressed by his name. They called him the Son of Heaven, not a metaphor, but a firm belief that his authority descended from the throne of clouds. The emperor was not merely a ruler, but a being above humans, half king, half ritual. Since the start of the Ming Dynasty in the 15th century, unbreakable rules were set within the city walls. The emperor is not touched, not interrupted, and is only seen on grand occasions. Everyone who entered his palace did so with a bowed head, never looking into his eyes, and speaking only when asked. His throne was established in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the largest wooden hall in ancient China, covered with gilded roofs and surrounded by dragon effigies, symbols of majesty and control. There, the emperor sat on a high golden chair, not as one seeking comfort, but as one performing an eternal, unchanging rite. The air in the hall was not ordinary. It was heavy with imperial incense and a solemn silence that made even the servants' footsteps seem inaudible. Every move around the emperor was precisely calculated, how many steps each minister took, at what moment they bowed, and how a file was presented or an order read. Even the slightest detail was subject to strict protocol, as if in a stage performance where there was no room for error. The emperor did not choose his meals, his waking time, or even his walking path in the gardens. Everything was predetermined and executed with precision. If he coughed, his word was recorded. If he smiled, good tidings were sent to the provinces. If he was angry, the color of the day changed in everyone's eyes. But the grandeur surrounding him was not enough to ward off loneliness. Despite thousands of servants, ministers, and guards, he lived in isolation within his golden palace. No friend, no confidant, no genuine voice to talk to. Everyone feared him, and everyone courted him, but he always remained alone, even in the presence of everyone. Yet, despite his authority, the emperor did not move this world alone. There were men who moved in the shadows, men with no names or faces known to history. Servants without features who were the eye that saw and the ear that heard without saying anything. In the depths of the forbidden city, far from the throne and the halls, were men whose names were not recorded and whose stories were not told. History calls them the silent servants. They were not ordinary servants, but perpetually open eyes and ears that never slept. Most of them were eunuchs, brought at a young age from distant areas, their connection to the life they once knew severed. No family, no home, no future, only the palace walls and tasks assigned without question and without the right to refuse. Their entry into the city was without celebration, and their departure happened only rarely, and perhaps never. These men were not permitted to participate in decision-making, but they were present in every corner. They carried edicts, oversaw the preparation of rituals, accompanied the emperor in his silence, and witnessed meetings that determined the fate of millions without uttering a word. Some were tasked with organizing daily life within the palace, from arranging the emperor's rooms to overseeing food and clothing. Others watched those who entered and exited. They knew who ascended to the empress's wing, who left the minister's room, and who was absent from the hall without explanation. Despite the silence imposed on them, they were not without power. In some eras, especially during the late Ming Dynasty, some became influential figures, consulted and feared for their influence. Their very silence was their source of strength. The one who does not speak has nothing recorded against him, and no one knows what he hides. Because they knew everything, they were the first to see changes in the court's mood. They saw hatred grow, cunning take shape, and dangerous decisions leak out before they were announced. They were like the city's shadow, unnoticeable, yet never absent. And if one of them suddenly disappeared, no one asked after him. If he reappeared in a new place with greater authority, he was warily welcomed and treated as one who knew more than he should. But not everyone who lived in the city was a man. Behind the embroidered corridors and curtains lived women whose voices no one heard and whose existence the world knew nothing about. There, in the depths, lived hearts that never saw the sun and dreams that never left their chambers. In the deepest corners of the forbidden city, where the sun reached only faintly through small silk-covered windows, lived women who neither heard nor saw. Some entered the palace as children, and some never left it. In those rooms, life proceeded at a slow, quiet, but taut rhythm, like a stretched string in the shadow. The emperor was not the only one filling the city with his authority. With him were the empress, the secondary wives, concubines, governesses, nurses, and the court women who formed an isolated feminine world. Each one had a role and a place, but not a voice in public. The ranks were clear, the empress at the top, followed by the favorite wives, and then those below them, women called only by their room numbers. Every movement within this female world was subject to strict rules. But behind these gentle rituals, the competition was fierce. Closeness to the emperor was not a matter of affection, but of power. The woman who bore a male child could see her son become the crown prince, and she, the mother of the future emperor. For this reason, smiles concealed jealousy, gifts sometimes hid poison, and kind words paved the way for a coming downfall. It happened that one of the wives disappeared in the middle of the night, and nothing was heard of her again. It was rumored that a cup of tea was placed unusually on a small tray, carried by a new, never-before-seen servant. It happened that a quarrel broke out between two maids over a piece of cloth, but the next day, an investigation was opened, positions were changed, and faces were replaced. The women in the city were not without influence. They had an invisible presence. They sent coded messages through fabrics and passed signs with glances. In some eras, the empress would dictate decisions to ministers from behind the curtain, and the emperor would sign without opposing her. Yet, these women remained in the shadow. They did not walk in the courtyards, attend the processions, or appear in official documents except rarely. They watched the seasons change from behind the windows, and life passed between porcelain and mirrors, between desire and waiting. But behind this calm, and beneath this silk, there was something deeper than envy and jealousy, there was fear. For the city, despite its silence, knew another face, a face that did not appear in the day or get written in the records, but was only whispered when no one was listening. Despite the calm of the forbidden city, despite the daily chanting of incense and the softness of feet walking on marble, an ancient fear resided beneath this tranquility. The city, built by Emperor Yongle, was not just a center of power, it was an arena for hidden conflict, where battles were waged without armies and blood was spilled without being recorded. It was uncommon to hear screams. Everything was done in silence, as if the killing itself adhered to the laws of ritual. When the emperor decided to silence a voice, he did not send soldiers but issued an order carried in a red envelope and executed by hands that no one saw. One summer night, a prince was absent from a banquet he was supposed to attend. The next day, his portraits were removed from the walls, and his name was erased from the records. No one asked, and no one commented. It was as if the man had never existed. Some whispered that he had expressed an opinion that should not have been said, or that he had approached a wing too closely where approach was forbidden. The conspiracies were not always political. Sometimes they were personal, conducted between rooms, slowly, quietly, but with a deadly poison. In one incident that was never written down, a eunuch responsible for private letters to the empress's wing disappeared. He was not an important man on the surface, but he knew more than he should and perhaps heard what should not be heard. That night, the lights went out in the west corridor and were not lit again until dawn, when the attendance was lower and the fear was greater. In the late 17th century, during the weakening grip of the Ming Dynasty, mysterious incidents multiplied. The body of a man was found hanging in the bamboo garden. It was called a suicide, but everyone knew the rope was not the type used in the city. In one of the back halls, a new rug was placed for no clear reason, hiding the trace of old blood beneath it. Even the emperor, despite his authority, was not immune to fear. He knew the walls were listening and that some servants were closer to an enemy than an ally. For this, he surrounded himself with whisperers, speaking little and trusting only those who were silent for too long. Danger was not announced, it was hinted at. The killer was not seen, he was felt, like a shadow passing between the curtains, leaving a chill in the air, and no one dared to ask. But when rule weakens and the throne crumbles from within, little of the glory remains. What daggers do not spill, the end slowly melts away. Let us accompany the city in its last moments, when it began to whisper its end. At the turn of the 20th century, specifically in 1911, a sound echoed in China unlike any heard before. It was not the sound of war or a cry of rebellion, but a silent collapse, a fall that began from inside the palace, not outside it. A rule that had lasted for centuries, a throne that had been steady as a mountain, began to crack in silence. The young Emperor Puyi was barely 5 years old when he sat on the throne. A child who could hardly read suddenly became the son of heaven. His small hands trembled before the imperial rug, and his tender face hid behind the unforgiving protocols. With every passing day, Puyi did not grow stronger, but felt more and more like a prisoner in a palace he did not understand, where politics tangled among his wooden toys. Outside, the country was boiling. The revolution began, the Ming Dynasty collapsed, and the Republic was proclaimed. The emperor was not immediately deposed, but continued to live in the palace as an empty symbol, without authority, without subjects, surrounded by servants but isolated from the nation. In 1924, the decisive order came: Puyi must leave. No army besieged the palace, and no crowds broke through the gates. Instead, they were silent orders carried by soldiers in uniform and read at the doors of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. It all ended simply. No blood, no screams, just a small suitcase and the steps of a child who became a man without knowing how. Puyi left the city in an ordinary car, with no guards, no procession, and no one bowing. He paused for a moment at the gate, looked back, and saw the courtyard empty. The columns stood without meaning, and the palaces were silent, as if they had long since bid farewell to life. He said nothing, he just walked away. The city did not fall, but it stopped. It was not destroyed or completely closed, but remained standing like a body without a soul. Time stopped in it for a moment, as a heart pauses in a sleeping body, and then resumes beating, but in a different way, calmer, weaker, and sadder. Even with the passing of years and the absence of emperors, the city continued to pulse in some way. In every corridor and every corner, the memory remained alive, and for those who listen closely, the echo is still there, unsleeping. Today, more than $600 years after its construction, the Forbidden City still stands. It is no longer the home of emperors, and no orders are issued from its halls, but it has not lost its presence. Between its flanks, old spirits still walk, unseen, but they can be felt that in 1905, parts of the city were open to foreign researchers, but visitors remained limited, and the corridors were free of noise. After the final departure of Emperor Puyi, the city began to transform from a sacred place into a museum. In 1925, it officially became the Palace Museum, and the footsteps of the public began to tread the courtyards once reserved for bowing in between the walls that held secrets. People now enter not to kneel, but to contemplate. They walk where kings walked, look where orders were read, and listen, hoping to hear something from that distant past. In winter, when ice covers the gilded roofs, visitors take pictures and stop for a long time in front of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Some whisper, "Did someone really sit here?" And others read the plaques, then raise their heads in silence, as if asking the city, "Who are you, and what remains of you?" The Forbidden City is no longer forbidden, but it has not become ordinary either. It remains a place between two times, the past that does not die and the present that does not dare to approach too closely. Those who visit feel they are not in a museum, but in the heart of a legend told without a voice, and heard only when everything is still. And so ends our journey between walls that do not speak but preserve everything, between halls that witness glory and fear, and courtyards that still hold the echo of ancient steps. The Forbidden City was not just palaces, it was a mirror to a long silence that continues to whisper even after time has fallen silent.